recall was one of 38 Degrees' first campaign, and the government have finally committed to bring through legislation. The problem is, it's not worth the paper it's written on. It's an utter stitch-up. So a few weeks ago, 38 Degrees members launched into action to make sure that we get real recall, a law that would make it possible for voters to sack their MPs who don't do their job properly. So far, hundreds of thousands of us have signed petitions, and most recently, thousands of us have also chipped in to pay for a lawyer, a top lawyer, Melanie, to write a piece of legislation which makes sure that we address all of the criticisms that people have about how recall can or cannot work. In that room there, MPs are about to sit down and debate our real recall bill that 38 Degrees members chipped in to make possible. They'll be scrutinising line by line to make sure that we can get a bill that both MPs and voters like us are happy with.
Recall, as most people understand it, is a simple thing. You have a given period of time, normally around 8 weeks, but we can argue about that, where constituents are given an opportunity to sign a petition. If you get to the threshold, normally, and we're proposing around 20%, that automatically earns constituents the right to then have a recall referendum. It's very simple. Do you want your MP to stay or go? And more than half of those taking part vote for their MP to go. You then have conventional by-election. That's how recall works. There's no middleman, there's no criteria, there's no trigger. It's a very simple, pure democratic process.
One of the things that I'm slightly concerned about with any bills is actually what we define as wrongdoing. I fear that if we were to have a situation where somebody votes on a particular issue, but that is not supported by a large number of people in your own constituency, is that something that could then trigger a recall?
Recall has to be, I think, not about what people say, it's about what they do, and we need to find a way on that.
It's almost impossible to come up with a clear definition of what constitutes wrongdoing by an MP, and therefore, as Jacob said, ultimately, you have to let one group of people decide, and the most obvious group are the constituents, because ultimately we're here to represent their interests, and we're here because of them.
And then we then have to trust our constituents to be behaving properly. But you do have parts of the country where perhaps that kind of complete logic and balance doesn't come in.
If people feel sufficiently strongly you have broken your promise and therefore broken trust, we should not have someone independently trying to determine whether you've done that before it's verified. Because the first time that someone says, well, actually that is not worthy of recall, you've undermined the whole system again. It really has to be an all or nothing.
You know, if it's something that is not going to be seen as a really, really fundamental breach of trust, breach of confidence, then I can't see the 20% even being reached.
The statement always has to start with, we the undersigned believe that the MP has breached the trust and confidence of the constituents because, think whatever they like in the 200 words, but just to focus the mind, this is about breaking trust and confidence.
So I can see the argument of taking out the intermediation, but you want to be sure that the 5%, isn't going to be the headlong rush of the mob.
Perhaps how to deter the persistent one that Andrew rightly points out. You just graduated to 7.5% for a second one.
So why should their recall have a higher percentage just because someone else has done something frivolous potentially before?
To avoid an individual MP becoming the target of something that is obsessive.
So I would simply say that the fear of the sort of vexatious campaign, fear of the kangaroo court, the mob, is not borne out by the experience of recall all around the world. And I would challenge anyone to find an example to contradict it, because I haven't been able to find one.
For me, this was a completely unique experience, a cross-party committee. I think it's a real tribute to 38 Degrees. I think it's been incredibly effective. I think people have come close together. There are still areas of disagreement, of course there are, but they've been discussed in a very mature way, and it feels to me at least as if there isn't actually that much division between us, so I'm really excited about going forward.
We basically have majority support for a proper recall bill. There are details and areas of disagreement, but the majority, I would say, support a proper recall bill, and that allows us now, with the mandate that we have around the table here, 22 MPs, all different parties, 7 different parties, it allows us now to make a very powerful case to govern. And I think this is a good example of Parliament setting the agenda for government. It very rarely happens, but it's possible. We're showing today that it's possible. And what makes it even more powerful is that it's based on a really big movement outside of Parliament. 200,000 people signing a petition, nearly 40,000 people responding to a detailed survey, telling parliamentarians this is what we want the bill to look like. This is sort of crowdsourcing in an extreme fashion, but it's proper democracy in action. I think it's very exciting.